All right. Tell me you're joking time. We're here in mid-May. Got a new guest with me today to rip through some current events, headlines, chaos, fun stuff, bullshit, all of the above. Got a little head bouncing going on, and you would know that if you scrolled over to YouTube to watch this. It's not enough to just listen to us talk. You should watch us talk. Makes it all sound.
Oh, please don't. Yeah, I have a great face for radio.
And it's in 4K, so it's all
right.
good.
That's right.
Yeah. I'll dial it down to 720. That'll probably help us both, right? Coming in with a little Jason Isbell in the 400 Dreamsicle. Are you an Isbell fan?
I don't think I'm familiar with him, but I like it.
Yeah, Mr. Jason Isbell. I like this song. It's called Dreamsicle.
Yeah, it's good open.
And really is kind of like a childhood throwback too. You remember the Dreamsicles?
Yeah.
As a kid, in the velvet lawn chair or the vinyl.
Vaguely, because kid was a long time ago.
The crisscross legs.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Thanks for joining me, Chris Dornfeld.
Great to be here.
So you did a little due diligence, a little reconnaissance.
Yeah.
And you still decided to show up.
I was intimidated. I mean, as I said earlier, the amount of information you keep in RAM is impressive. Across a spectrum, I mean, just pulling up facts and data. And I understand you're a little bit of a wonk for this stuff, but
a little bit.
It is still impressive, a little intimidating.
Well, I appreciate that. I get confused at times though, because there's things that I want to believe are true, some that I make true in my own head, but the majority of it I do read.
That's right.
So
I wouldn't know the difference. You just randomly 48% of the facts are true.
Well, I don't know if you saw this along those lines. It's funny, and I'll address our benevolent leader T 2.0. There was a little bit of a video farce of him in his college days with his gold high tops.
Yeah,
shooting a free throw, and the ball doesn't even hit the bottom of the net. Total air ball, and everybody's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, I made that.
Oh, that's it. That's an SNL spoof.
Yeah, was that where it was?
Yeah.
Okay.
They do a whole bit of.
Yeah, I just saw.
Discovers the high
clip.
tops and then makes up a whole series of.
And everything made him like.
I can lie about everything.
Superpower.
Yeah. Superpower.
No. I made that. Brought you in here because actually, my wife was the one that kind of connected the dots. Even though we had connected dots in a previous life and just really didn't follow through on the dot connection.
That's right.
And we talked a little while back, and based on our conversation, I'm like, "Oh, dude, you'd be perfect for this." Cross a lot of T's, dot a lot of I's. So, for the sake of the listener, though, I kind of want to set the table a little bit because you, in a way, I was thinking about this earlier. Trolling LinkedIn, and then reminiscing our own conversation. You tend to have had a similar path as I, and what I mean by that is. You're not a lifer. You're not a corporate lifer. You didn't start in the mailroom and work your way up to the C-suite at this point. You tend to move a little more fluidly into industries.
Yeah. We embrace some of those, millennial attributes before they were popular. Switching careers, switching jobs.
Yeah. I was a young Xer, so I make fun of millennials for doing it, but it's okay if I do it.
Yeah. No, that's right. That's right.
No, you know what it reminds me of is I love good ad campaigns. And a little while back, a number of years back, maybe 5, 6, 7 or so. Do you remember GM? They had that truck series where the guy was standing, the new neighbor comes walking up, and he closes the tailgate to his truck, and the guy goes, "So, what do you do?" And then his brain starts going like to his fishing trip, and he's in the wood shop, and he's in
all the things.
I don't do much.
Yeah.
That's how I view you in a degree, based on our conversation, based on what I know. So let's just jump to the finish line first. Currently, I'm going to read this just to be certain here. WeWhistle.com.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting name out of the gate.
Yeah.
Give the elevator
pitch of what we're doing.
Yeah, let's go there.
Yeah, we really, in a nutshell, focus on human behavior. So macro level, constant technology change, not going to slow down, pace of everything around us, creates a lot of stress. there's ways to help us manage that and help businesses and people more successfully navigate that. And a lot of that has to do with incentives and understanding human motivation, both the intrinsic and extrinsic. So we built a business that really built a tool set to help that occur more easily. So that takes shape on construction job sites. We're often helping improve safety behaviors, right? Protocols are constantly changing, technology is changing. So we're helping folks sort of navigate that more effectively.
So if I viewed it accurately, because I went through the site for a little bit, it's almost as if it's like an incentive program.
Yeah. Incentives and rewards are kind of our primary tool. But yeah.
So, okay. So here's why I wanted to touch on that, the last part first, your current job first, is because of what I was just referencing, your own fluidity, my own fluidity within the workplace, because I've been finance and real estate and a lot of different things, and they all kind of overlap. The Venn diagram, it's not as much a bunch of circles. It's pretty close. It's more like a flower. In doing We Whistle and working on the incentives, working on these things, is that kind of part of the primary focus to try and slow down mobility, to create a little bit more loyalty to, because the transfer portal for workers, I don't think it's ever been crazier.
I wouldn't describe it as slowing it down. I don't think we're taking the approach of, we want things to happen more slowly, because I don't think we can affect that.
Yeah.
But I think there's an important role people play in this journey, and we'll probably end up in some AI conversation down the road, but the pace of change is not going to slow.
Yeah.
But how we navigate that creates a lot of stress, right? And we can reduce that stress. There's some interesting neuroscience around change and how we deal with change. So this just constantly comes at us now, right, in our life and in our work. We are really looking at how we can use these tools to just make that process easier for people, which ultimately then gets people to the end result they want and the company wants, right? I'm more effective in my job. I'm safer on my job. That's a win for everybody.
What are you hearing kind of in the trenches from these business owners? Maybe let's talk about construction in particular,
Sure.
or focus on that. Is the primary issue when it comes to employees, is it acquiring? Is it retaining? Is it entertaining? Is it creating loyalty? What's the hot topic as you see it through this early phase of We Whistle and what you guys are doing?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest challenge of the industry, and I'd say this probably extends across industrial, so you could throw manufacturing and everything else, right? We have undersupported that ecosystem for a few decades. There's trade schools no longer in high schools.
Mm-hmm.
Those programs where you learn these things, shop and all that, right, have all sort of drifted away, underfunded, gone. So we don't have a next generation of workers coming to that blue collar ecosystem. So if you look at the numbers, and I'd go back to your metaphor of a flower, these are all, the things you described are all circles that are pretty tightly overlapped. Right. So retention is kind of the same as how you attract people.
What's that drawing tool?
Venn diagram? Oh, the little spirograph or whatever you use.
Yeah, where it's got the two gears.
Yeah.
It's one of those things.
Yeah, that's a throwback. So, right, we'll just have our audience will understand that.
Jarts is next.
We're really focused on, right, how those things are all interrelated. It's about culture. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, it's about the environment you create and people wanting to be part of that environment. But right now, the number is pretty staggering. I'll make up a stat, but it's something like 45% of the construction workforce is going to age out and retire in the next decade or two.
Right.
So you have a huge shift in knowledge that's going to drift away. And how do you maintain the positive momentum in all the industry and change when we don't have, we're not keeping up with data center construction, energy construction. I mean, this is an industry that affects all industries.
Yeah.
So it's beginning to grow from not just what do I do about the knowledge, but how do I attract the next generation of workers into this environment? How do I train them? How do I keep them? It's very competitive. So it's a complex set of human issues are now probably the biggest barriers to growth in construction, and probably will be for the next 10 years. It's all people.
Well, okay, so people, let's talk about kids though within the context of this as well, because you and I both have kids that are roughly the same age. I believe yours are just slightly older. One is out of college or exiting
I have
college.
3, one out of college, one exiting college, one in college.
Okay, so I have one in college, one going in about 2 years, and then I got a puppy there. I got a 5th grader. going
Surprise.
to 6th. Yeah, he was actually. I need distraction. I need cover. No, I love you, Max. Your kids seem to be thriving. They're really good institutions and/or have exited them. But there's a large percentage of our population that has kids that are the same age that are not going into those institutions. A, because they can't get in, or B, they clearly can't afford it. That within our marketplace, everybody's trying to figure out what are they going to do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think about construction in particular, really trades construction, electric, plumbing, things like that.
Yeah.
A lot of the companies that you work with, clearly that's their bread and butter. They do those things. And it's almost as if I think the industry as a whole is doing an awful job of billboarding the true value, because these individuals, they make good money, with realistically not a lot of upfront cost. It doesn't require that 4-year BA or BS, right? It doesn't need no MBA.
Oh yeah, no, and in some you're paid through the apprenticeship process,
Right.
So you can go into multiple trades, probably within a couple of years earn a pretty good 6-figure salary. In some cases, after a decade or so, multiple 6 figures.
Yeah.
There's master plumbers making $250,000 a year.
Oh yeah.
As you said, you're not bringing on huge college debt. There's a lot of programs, the Association of General Contractors and even some of the bigger builders in town have programs targeting, trying to recruit people into it. But that's it's a relatively new, I'll say, muscle or motion. It's really in the last 10 years this has emerged where they need to go recruit people in just to keep up with the demand and opportunity.
So let's pull this over into the real world and what's going on at the macro level then, because again, I want to keep this kind of Venn diagram tight. At the presidential policy level, the idea of these tariffs is to repatriate all these good old manufacturing jobs, right? And what we're talking about is an industry that exists here now, is established. It has unlimited amount of opportunity for growth via, we don't really have a homes plan, but we definitely have a data center plan, big warehouses. I mean, those are being built everywhere all the time,
Yep.
all day, every day. There's a shortage there. I think I saw a stat one time that the total number of manufacturing jobs that are unfilled at this point in America is about 500,000, somewhere between 400 and 500,000. Yep. So when you hear this clamoring for, we need to bring these jobs back, how do you true it up, being feet on the street near an industry that is already short-staffed, that has a hard time, ideologically funneling individuals into said industry, in spite of high wages, high benefits, opportunity for growth, et cetera. Where is this not truing up in your own world, or is it, or maybe I'm just misinterpreting?
Well, I think it's sort of what's reality and what's theater, right? I mean, we were talking earlier about politics and managing perception versus policy, and debating policy. And I think a lot of this that goes on right now is it's talking points. It's not really grounded in what's actually happening or what's going on. As you said, there is, would it be a 4% unemployment?
Yeah.
I mean, historically it's been that for 10 years. So the idea of we need to stop immigrants from taking our jobs. Like there's way more jobs right now, and has been for 10 years. Same challenge in healthcare. I mean, it's multiple.
How do you react to the counterpoint? And this is a conservative counterpoint, or really an conservative economic counterpoint, in that we're at 4% unemployment, but our effective workforce is really, really low. It's like at 48%, and a large percentage of people that are viewed as full-time employees are working 2 jobs or whatever. Where do you view the disconnect between what the macro data says, we're at 4% unemployment, but the micro street level is saying these jobs aren't good enough? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question where the rubber hits the road on this stuff, and it's hard for me to sort out, right, this source of truth, right? I will rely more on when I'm talking to a general contractor and they're saying, if we're talking boots on the ground, mm-hmm. they're having a hard time recruiting, or this job's a little slower. They're trying to increase automation, productivity, because they can't keep up with demand. So I don't know. I think it's easy to look at macro level statistics, and I think just about any point of view, you can go find a stat to sort of back up what you want to argue.
Right.
But I don't see that result. I mean, certainly in our region, I don't think there's a shortage of opportunity, right, for people to go tap into it. Now, there's a lot of limitations or restrictions on people's ability to do that, right? That can impede that public transportation access, depending where you are in underserved areas. But in general, I mean, if we're generalizing, I think there's lots of opportunity for people to grow and do well. So a lot of the policies, to me, they're as I said, it's hard for me to tell what's theater and talking points to distract you from what's going on versus the reality of, we need more people in the trades. And there's lots of opportunities for people to grow and have great, healthy lifestyles. And that's one that I think that's an industry that's going to be, although significantly impacted by technology and automation and robots and cool things. But I don't see, buildings building themselves or roadways anytime soon.
No. I mean, there's only, 3D printers are great for, trinkets.
Yeah.
I mean, they're getting to the point where they can throw up a shed,
Yeah.
In 11 hours or whatever it is.
But the human factor's not going away. I mean, we went from, everyone can imagine a nail gun and a hammer, right, as a comparison. One makes you 20 times more efficient in a carpentry roll than pulling out a nail each time and hitting it over the head versus, tap, tap, tap. The worker's still part of that equation, right? That tool set will continue to evolve. We're still going to have high demand for this.
What about perception? Do you view maybe is part of the issue just an issue of perception? Because we have our traditional schools from a K-12 perspective, and kind of the expectation is everybody puts their kids into school for the most part. Let's just say, there is no number, but let's just say it's 98% of people put their kid in school, and the game plan is don't get in trouble, learn enough to get to college to get a job, right? As opposed to a nation like, let's say Germany, right, in which at an early age within their K-12 system, I don't know what the numbers are exactly, they have tracking, whether they're liberal arts minded or STEM minded or trades, and that's normal. Then nobody's belittled if they track towards a trade in that society.
That's right.
Here, there is kind of a stigma.
Yeah, and I think that's fading. I mean, I think that was definitely, as we grew up, really a core thesis when all these programs got wound down. It was, of course, in the data bore that out, right? That if you got college educated, you were much more likely to have higher income, that sort of thing. But, just as it was different 20 years before that, it's different now, right? And so these systems need to continue to evolve. We need to bring back those feeder programs. I think the perception around blue collar is changing right now. I mean, I don't think it is viewed the way it was when we grew up, which is really almost a second-class citizen. I think there's a lot more respect and appreciation for that. I think that's, if there's one silver lining that came out of COVID, I think some of it was that, that people began to appreciate restaurant workers quite differently, right? It's not just the person. We began to tip differently and support that. And I think that's across the board, realizing these critical workers are really what make our society function, and they play a really important role. So although I can sit in an office and write code and, think about design, that grocery store worker is ultimately, helps me live.
Yeah.
So I think that was the shift, and I think it will continue to grow, or needs to. But we also, as society, we need to value people differently. I mean, teachers are super critical to this equation, no matter which track and how you slice it.
And they're so low.
And they're the worst paid. Many have second jobs. Many are trying to scrape by. I mean, that from a policy standpoint, like that, I think we all collectively could agree is really important to our society.
Last year, I think, right? Missouri's two most famous teachers ended up leaving teaching for their OnlyFans careers. True.
I don't know if that's the right path, but
the wrong path. Okay.
It speaks to, I think, the challenge, right, that ecosystem is facing.
Yeah, well, let me ask you just a personal question then, along the lines of all this as it applies to your kids, because your kids, we've already mentioned the whole college path and the schools, et cetera. But the world they're entering, as opposed to the world that we entered at the same age, it's not the same. The idea of the ability to, quote, live the American dream. Scott Galloway talks about this all the time, where, this is the first generation in which the kids will not experience a higher, income ratios, et cetera, than the previous generation. It's inverted now. Houses are more expensive. College payoff is higher. Food, cars. The average new car is like $48,000, I think, right now. Like if you take the national average, if you wanted to go out and just buy a new car, you're going to be paying on average 48. So does that scare you when you zoom out and look at?
I mean, I think we have some systemic problems, right? If we're going to get into policy discussion and some things that we would change. I think it's interesting from my vantage point being, I'm a little bit of an optimist. I wonder as I look at those data points, right? What's the source and what's the argument? And is the metric of home ownership, although important or historically very important to wealth creation, is that the right metric, right? Is financial gain the right metric of societal health or individual health? And I think there's a richer conversation starting to emerge, and you're seeing it with the younger generations about lifestyle, right? The choices I make. I'm not chasing that as much.
They're drinking less, they're exercising more.
What they value, right? And saying the quality of my life and the quality of my experience, maybe that's a more important metric. So although we do see those challenges, and I'm not saying those are good things that they're happening. I don't know the long-term effect of that, but I am intrigued and kind of excited by the evolution that is occurring in the younger generation of saying we're going to value things a little differently. I'm going to value work. I've employees talking about taking a sabbatical just because they want to spend a couple months focusing on focusing on just some other things in their life they think they're important. I don't think I'd have been brave enough to do that in my 20s. I don't think societally, you've gotten a lot of pressure not to do that. Like, what do you think?
We would have just been fired.
Right.
That's what would have happened.
Right. So that world is changing. And so I think how we measure success also maybe we should look at. But I do think there's some, if you back away again and look at the accumulation of wealth, that is a problem. Right. The concentration of power, that is a problem. Whether generationally how it plays out, because your access to food, nutrition, healthcare is improving. I mean, we could say, that's the wealth creation is great, but I also read an article that talked about, people being born today are going to live to be 135, right? Their longevity and maybe quality of life might be much better overall. Are they as rich economically? Maybe not. Right.
Well,
so
I mean,
to mix the issues, I think it's one about wealth concentration. That's one challenge, but societally, is the generation worse off? I don't know yet.
Did you ever see or did you watch the show? I believe it's on Prime Video, The Blue Zone, or maybe it's Netflix. Blue Zones.
I've not seen it.
Yeah, you should check it out.
It's healthy, and I've heard of the term. It's healthy environments where people live to be like 100.
Yeah. Basically, they are regions or cities that have a really, really high percentage of individuals that are centurions. Right, they live to 100 or beyond. And the thing that really struck me in the show, because it features, I believe, 7 cities / small regions, money is not the factor.
Right.
For the most part, in fact, the Costa Rican area, there was, I believe, 2 Asian areas. We're talking kind of poverty level stuff, but they had super high levels of individuals that lived to 100 and beyond. So thinking of this as you were just talking about what is the value? What is the measuring stick?
Right.
And I personally have a theory. Like I think kids too, that are coming out of college, the Z generation or whatever we want to call them, I think it has a lot to do with the reality that so many things are unattainable that our generation and previous generations have had. Fiscal stability being kind of at the top of the pile, the inability to come up with 20% down on a $400,000 house, right? They can't do that. They don't have that means. Brand new cars, they can't do that. There's so many limitations. So as opposed to fighting that battle, they're finding their zen in other areas.
That's right.
And it's kind of shifting really kind of their own value props.
And so are they ultimately unhappier, or happier living a longer life? So we talk about car ownership, right? Is that an important metric of success? Is that how we? And so I think there's bigger conversations that are starting to happen, which I think are exciting, right, to see. And again, I don't mean to support in saying that certain policies don't need to change or we need to make home ownership more attainable. It's just I question some of the metrics at the macro level. We talk about these things.
Well, I mean, there's a big push too. I mean, there's a lot of theories within the media world as it applies to the economics of kids and the choice of do you rent, do you buy, or do you keep your overhead really really low and just enter the market?
Yeah.
No, because we've always been taught, and I practice this, that a home and real estate, you need that as part of your portfolio, right? That's an anchor.
Yeah.
That's a foundational thing that is going to get you above and beyond.
And it's marginally true, right? There's an article that came out a couple months
Right.
ago and was talking about the difference of home ownership versus renting.
Right.
And the net wealth creation over time. And basically what it alluded to is like, well, in some markets, it's kind of worked out okay. And some it really hasn't.
Yeah.
So depending where you are and depending on your circumstance, so it's not a clear cut, yeah, this is the right answer. So again, I go back to people talk about, well, this generation, they don't own homes like the previous generation. Like, oh, okay. I mean, that's probably bad for the real estate market.
Yeah.
But at a macro level, in terms of people's success and happiness, it's not clear whether that's really a driving indicator.
Well,
and the upward mobility point you made earlier, like, well, that's been in question for multiple decades because there really isn't a lot of upward mobility. We are easier than other countries to have upward mobility, but the data shows very few people actually move up that rung out of their current class structure.
Yeah, it's funny too, because we also see a lot of kind of defensive posturing through these narratives. And what I mean by that, for example, boomer generation, whenever they start to give their wise wisdom tidbits as it pertains to buying a house and how important it is, et cetera, a lot of them, when you really ask them to define what is it, why, they immediately lean into, well, it's the tax deductions, and it's this growth by protectionism, right? It's a little bit of a too conservative of a play, and a lot of the arguments are like, look, just rent, take your overhead down, and that little bit that you're savings, put it into Bitcoin, put it into NVIDIA, whatever, and you're going to beat the rate of return that brick and mortar would give you over the same period of time.
Correct.
So, but here, let me ask you this. Do you think your kids get that? Do they think about kind of the financial hurdles, the financial realities that are going to be facing them now over the next 2, 4, 6 years?
Probably not the same way we did, right? But I think so. I mean, it's tough because, my kids, my daughters, I think probably in about 8th grade began to eclipse my intellectual ability. Right. So watching them evolve by junior year. So what they think about, I still feel like I'm catching up to them a lot.
Yeah.
In their thinking. So I don't know. I mean, it's interesting that you have a generation growing up with an access to knowledge resources that didn't exist. You still remember going through card catalogs and trying to find information. And, you have all the information and all the tutorial videos. And I'm amazed as I watch people just pick up new skills because they watch a couple of videos and decide on their own. I mean, there's an opportunity there of sort of how their lives are being enriched and how they think and solve problems because it's a collective that didn't exist when we grew up.
So this anti-Harvard approach that's occurring at the national level and kind of in lines of what we're talking about, I view the potential in short order that universities' problems are not going to be fighting with the federal government over ideology or balance of ideas, right? I think that their bigger challenge is going to be AI and the access to technology for individuals to go it alone way easier.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of that is true, right? We tend to like to define things in binary terms. I remember when .com 1.0 occurred and online retail first started to take off and people, Amazon was first, growing. And
first market. Yeah.
Eventually it was, we're not going to have brick and mortar retail in 5 years. I mean, the predictions on the decline of brick and mortar retail, although partially have played out.
Yeah.
Shopping is a social experience. So I think if you define the value of a university simply through the lens of what is the curriculum being distributed, you're thinking about it more of a library than a university, right? So yeah, it will replace the library, but the peer group interaction, the exploration, the curiosity, it's really developing critical thinking, problem solving. It's not actually the information because that becomes stale. And as you point out, it's ubiquitous. It's become a commodity. It's not. But the alumni network, the access to wisdom and experience, that enablement to universities, I don't think goes away.
I'm with you. We're going to take a quick break, come back. I've got a list of short topics here. I know I asked you to bring in a few, so we're going to do a little rapid fire news exchange. Tell me you're joking, like, review, follow, share, all free, all helps my low self-esteem. We'll be right back. Those three are great.
Well, just there are three guys our age,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, they.
That format I find interesting.
Yeah, SmartList has that unique. They're three very different individuals that absolutely you understand why they're best friends.
Yes.
And that's why it works.
And then they randomly throw in a secret ingredient.
Yeah.
Right. And 8 times out of 10, it works really well.
Yeah. All right. Since in the previous segment, we figured out and solved all of our children's future problems, I want to jump into some news of the day and just kind of dissect it fun style. I'm going to read a quote real quick here. This is from the individual at Ham. Quote, "I literally bet on every game I ever managed." End quote. Mr. Pete Rose, at some point, I don't have the date on which he said it, but he was just yesterday or day before, I believe, the Writers Association, the Baseball Hall of Fame, basically said, you know what, you're not that bad. We're going to make you eligible again. And historically for me, whenever he got busted and all that, kind of played out, I just thought it was stupid. It's like, why, you're Pete Rose. Why? I get the people like are addicted to drugs.
Still holds the all-time hitting record.
Yeah, exactly. But that's stupid. Like, and simplistically for me, it was like, well, you're just not somebody any of us should value.
And to clarify, right, if I understand this correctly, there was a ban put on when he was
when he was busted for gambling.
And then he was banned along with one of the guys from Sheila's Joe Jackson, I think is, and they said, if you're in this category of being banned from baseball, you can never qualify for the Hall of Fame, right? So the recent change was, okay, now you can.
Yeah.
But it's 20 years later. Or
yeah, like and the political conspiracy is the Roy Vaughn, I believe, is the attorney, was the one that over the years has repeatedly tried to advocate on behalf of Pete Rose. Guess who his buddy is? Is Mr. T 2.0. And it just got me thinking about this in a much different way. Now, and some of my friends are listening, JB, TDS. Well, you know what? He's our president. If we can't apply his feedback to these types of issues or influence, then shame on all of us. We're seeing time and time again in our society right now, especially at the top level, the political level in particular, but the corporate level as well, this just constant rotation of forgiveness for not only
corruption,
ill will, felony acts, etc. And here we are with Pete Rose, and all of my ambivalence up to yesterday about Pete Rose, like getting in or not getting in, to a degree, I'm like, he broke the law. Whatever. No, he shouldn't. It really offends me now because he's eligible. And I think it's, I'm zooming out, and I want to get your take. Do you see what I see or feel, the same, or maybe view it differently, in so much that we are giving people with moral character flaws or actual corruption on their resume, we're giving all of them way too much of a pass because we're allowing what should be no-brainers as far as that's bad versus that's forgivable a pass.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with the macro level, right? I think there's a lot of that going on that I don't know, it's a little sad for me. I mean, how I feel about that is it's sad. It's sad this is the state of our country, and we can talk about accountability and responsibility, but at the same time say, well, except if it's my friends and they're paying, money to get out of it. And it falls into that, power is ultimately and money is ultimately the source of truth, right? It's this perverted sort of approach. I think it comes to Pete Rose, it's a little more gray for me. I'm not as emotionally committed. I get the construct you're creating, which is saying, well, this is a truth, and you sort of should be on the right side of it. And I'd also say that's also part of his legacy, right? And so you could think about, I don't know, if prison is a parallel to that. Say, well, after you serve your time or you repay your debt to society,
rehabilitated.
Does it end, or is that just a forever thing? And so, as I read about that, it to me feels like, all right, well, you have a 20-year window where it's known you violated the rules and you're not going in for 20 years. And you might not ever get into the Hall of Fame. You might not ever get that recognition. It's not a guarantee, but it's to say, maybe there's flexibility. Maybe it should be reviewed. I think most of our systems are imperfect because they're often tied to people and decision making. So I'm okay with that review. I'm okay with that conversation happening. I think elevating some of those discussions are a useful byproduct of it. The fact people are talking about it in sports and saying, well, what is the right balance? Where do we draw the line and what is appropriate? Those are good conversations for us to have and continue to have. So I don't know. The macro level, I agree with you. The Pete Rose issue, I have mixed feelings. I'm okay with it either way.
Yeah, I think it's, again, maybe a little bit of the TDS in me. And I own it, by the way. I'm not afraid to admit that. It's just like at some point we have to get back to what is just simplistic, what is right and what is wrong.
What is truth?
Well, that's a whole.
I mean,
other.
Ultimately, what is truth? Because we don't have a structure based on facts.
In this
right and wrong.
In this particular case, the truth is he said it. He admitted, I gambled on every single game I've ever managed in my career. Okay. So then if you extrapolate out of that, if he bet on the other team, he absolutely has the power to make decisions that gives the other team the advantage to win, right?
Yeah.
I mean, imagine a surgeon that's in cahoots with a life insurance policy.
Oh, well But those conflicts of interest, which is what you're describing, right, as a conflict of interest, is being accepted and occurring everywhere. And that ultimately is the challenge we have right now. And what you're connecting it to is, hey, we're blurring a lot of lines that shouldn't be blurred. So that we as a society need to stand behind. And I think my hope is that conversation that's occurring, right, that's growing out of these things, people will end up, I ultimately have faith in people, right? They'll end up, and I think most people I've spoken with have a pretty good sense of right and wrong. And most people want the right things to happen and want their kids to be successful and want to address these things. We get caught up in the spiral of media and tribalism and these other narratives that distort, I think, our understanding.
Well, you said something a little while ago, about trying to determine what is the truth, and what I'm waiting for now, as soon as it's inevitable, social media is going to feed on this thing until it's like a piranha frenzy. There's going to be a group of people that are going to be like, how do you know he gambled? He could have said that, but you don't know that he gambled.
Oh, I'm sure it's happening now.
Yeah, well, that's my point. Yeah. Like, it's like...
Or it's a conspiracy. Even though he said it was really minor and something. Yeah, there's all sorts of narratives that can then emerge.
Yeah. Well, did you see that walk-off home run that he could have never known about?
Yeah.
Shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
All right, let's get Pete Rose off the bar. What you got for me?
Well, I think, the point he goes back to, I just want to mention that again. It's about managing perception, versus the policy. And I think the challenge we have to deal with right now, and this speaks a little to AI, that would probably be the theme.
Yeah.
I've been most focused on the last couple weeks, how that is going to change our ability to understand reality, to understand facts, because now we can create imagery artifacts, right, that fit any narrative we want to. So we can almost define our truth, which is what we're seeing today. Mm-hmm. And that creates a ripple of challenges and I think conflicts in our society that's a little bit of what's keeping me up at night, is how are we going to navigate this to make decisions if we can't find a source of truth, if we can't find or believe or have confidence or trust in the information we're being told. Yeah. We all need to be a little bit more skeptical, but we also need to find ways that we can actually find that trust again.
Yeah, it's I don't see a construct, in today's environment, whether it's, well, shit, I even see the chaos like on the soccer field, amongst soccer parents of 10-year-olds. Like it's this, everything is binary. Yeah. And there's a large gap of, you just don't see empathy. There's no empathy in a lot of these environments and these interactions. And, and to your point, like, number one, trying to determine what is real, what is true, let alone figuring out what is right. And you have AI that basically is feeding off of everything that AI is an output machine that feeds on the input of all of us, right?
That's right.
So therefore, when it does kick out its summary statements, via ChatGPT or Grok or whatever, which I find it hilarious on Twitter in particular, whenever somebody's like, hey, Grok, who is the biggest corrupt, contractor of the U.S. government? Well, it's Elon Musk, if you should do it. Like, It lays this is the output. So AI in particular, let me ask you this. Do you fear AI taking away the need for us to become or maintain any empathy or human value, and we just take what is given to us from the large language models.
Well, I think a lot of us, whether it's a language model or another source of information,
Yeah.
right? I think a lot of us have already handed that moniker over to someone.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look at the proliferation of media and now social media and the percentage of people that get their information from
Cat turd.
any of these different news sources and whoever they're following, whoever they want to
Right.
believe. So we've created, millions of echo chambers for ourselves to get information from. Will AI make that worse? In some ways, but it also, I think, opens doors to begin to address and solve that, right? That you can also create tools that begin to ferret out what is true and what is not, right? And I think this is actively being worked on by a lot of companies of how do you begin to create the counterpoint? Because it's the same issue in security, dealing a lot in cybersecurity. And I've talked to a couple of different entrepreneurs about it, their fear of sort of innovation threats and stealing IP and how quickly that AI world's going to evolve. And largely what I've heard back is it's a continual cat and mouse game, right?
Yep.
And I think that's just how it's going to play out. If your motivation is good in trying to make good things happen, you're going to use the tool for something that's going to create a benefit. And if your motivation is I want to distort, manipulate, and abuse people, that's also going to happen. But I'll go back to your analogy where you started of parents and the lack of empathy on the soccer field.
Yeah.
We both played soccer. Our kids play soccer. Watching that, and sometimes in amazement, watching that insane parent who's standing there screaming and just going nuts. And that's the story you tell and talk about. But we often lose sight of, but the other 20 parents on the sideline weren't going nuts, right? And they were
Sure.
being very calm and appropriate and empathetic. And there's always a couple, but if you look at that portfolio of people attending, right, the population, 80%, I don't know what the right number is, but all right, there's sound, level-headed people who see that these are kids and aren't going to push them too hard or scream at someone else's kid. And I think we have to appreciate or see that as well. We lose sight of the other 80% that I think is doing the right thing and trying to find truth.
Well, before we jumped on the mic at the beginning, we were kind of casually talking about content in general and messaging and branding just from a generic standpoint, and it got me thinking because I've heard a lot, especially post-mortem from the 24 election, and that one of the fatal flaws on the blue team side was its inability to understand media, content, and distribution, and what it really meant, and in so much that they approached the election and they approached the campaigns from we are going to educate perspective.
Yeah. Yep.
The Republican consultants who drive their content took a completely different approach, and all they did was focus on how do we gather as much attention as possible. It doesn't need to be true. It doesn't. In fact, we all know that large portions of it weren't, but they understood that if they could gather the volume, and maintain the attention spans, and entertain, and create fear, and create mobility, that was their strategy to.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back. This is probably the theme of the day, right? Politics is about managing perception more than it's about debating policy.
Yeah.
And I think you have, the intellectual elite. I mean, this frames very nicely, and I think the Democratic Party has played into that, which is let's frame the arguments about why our policy is better. And I think where the rubber hits the road for most people, they don't understand those connections. You look at the super bill or whatever, it's the big, beautiful bill being passed right now, right?
Yeah.
It's a huge collection of things. Most people can't understand most of it, right? They're not going to take the time to try to break down
2 and 20s
the 400 pieces. And I mean, let alone the one section on tax policy change is enough, right, to write a thesis on. We're not going to engage there. Right, which is smart. They're going to bundle this all, and they're going to push it all through and sort of cram it down people's throats and move their agenda. Look at the public narrative and what they're communicating. Right,
Yep.
they're trying to shape emotion and perception. They're not debating the nuances of why tax code policies.
Have you noticed that their common theme? This is the number one talking point that they've all been instructed to put out there is that the Democrats are trying everything in their power to fight this and eliminate these tax cuts for you, the middle class, right? That's it. That's the line. The Democrats do not want you to get a tax cut, in which mathematically on the chart is a factual statement, but it's the other 72 pages of bullshit
Yeah.
that does the other mathematical equations that.
I think it's a recognition. I mean, it's broader than politics, but you're never going to win an emotional argument with facts.
No.
And that continues to, I think, to be the challenge as we approach things that seem so illogical. And so as a logical person, I want to have a conversation that's fact-based.
So let me ask you just a simplistic.
But as a human and knowing we're emotionally driven creatures, and it sits back to our business and understanding the neuroscience of the chemicals and emotion that drivers.
So explain that. So explain the irony and the hypocrisy of leading up to November, egg prices, inflation. All the statistics pointed to the fact that inflation as a whole was declining as a whole, as a number. Now we all know inflation is a cumulative effect. Once the prices are up, they don't go down. That's stagflation or deflation. Just decreasing the inflationary number on a quarter over quarter or month over month basis just means that the rate has slowed, right? But there were certain things that were coming back into realistic realms, groceries, gas. They weren't going.
Yeah, egg prices have come back.
Yeah,
down, right?
but that was on exit polling. That was like number one. It was the economy. It was like, look, I don't care what your numbers say. I feel this.
Yep, I see that.
Okay,
right?
now
and it was messaged hard and pushed hard because everyone knew everyone buys eggs.
Yeah.
So everyone sees that. It's a very real story around this concept.
So I track the brown egg, the grass brown eggs from Aldi's because we go through, I don't know, 4 dozen a week with all my boys.
Yeah.
Since February 1st and all of this new, avian flu and everything else that was going on, $5.99 a dozen. Today, actually last night I looked at it again. Guess how much it is?
It's like $3.50 or something.
$5.99 a dozen.
Oh, really?
Has not moved a fucking penny. Not one. Right? That's the reality. Gas was $2.99 a gallon. I just drove past the BP in Webster on the way here this morning. Guess how much it is? $2.99 a gallon. And there's these headlines. Inflation's down, gas is down, eggs are... It's like empirically, that's a lie. AAA even says that the national average, which was $3.10 on January 1st, is now $3.22 a gallon, right? Explain to me why you think this huge base of Republican supporters in particular that are fringe. I'm not going to call most conservatives crazy because they're not. I know a lot of them, good people. They're smart. Why do you think people are believing the blatant lie as to the direction of the pricing?
Because they want to.
That's a simple answer. Depressing, but
I mean, because they want to. Again, I don't think you're going to find a factual answer that explains logic behind something. Because I don't think it's logical. I think it's.
But I brought you on here to make me feel better.
It's a.
You're not making me feel better.
No, it's a tribalism, right? It allows me to feel part of a connected community, and I have an ecosystem of folks that I probably consume media that reinforces that, and that helps build connection and bond. And I talk to people, and it's fun to be a counterpoint to some people that I want to be different from. I don't like something about you, and therefore, look, I'm different than that. I mean, these are all pretty primal.
Do you think that
concepts.
Do you think this is all simplistically just a Dodgers versus Red Sox thing in the long run, in which it really has nothing to do with the quality of the team or the performance of the team or the wins or the results, et cetera? It just purely is tribalism because the Dodgers are my team, and it doesn't matter how bad they are. It doesn't matter.
I think for some people, I mean, I think what's interesting, you look at the population numbers. I read something, and it was 32% of the population voted for Trump or something. And another 30% or something voted for Kamala, and a third didn't vote. Right? I mean, what is going on there? Right? What is going on with a third who's so disengaged? They're just letting this all happen to them. So, I don't know. I mean, I think the system is set up to want to create, and I think the whole system is set up to want to create division. Right, to want to create argument, conversation, because it distracts us from the ability for people to move their own agendas. I look at this administration as a clear example of the theater that constantly goes on and the news cycles. And I mean, I could almost go down, right, pull up any news site and just count the number of articles that are politically centered.
Yeah.
This was not part of our world growing up. I mean, how often were a news cycle consumed by, the 80 things a president did that day, right? It's a TV show. The bigger question is, what is really going on?
Well, we also grew up in a time in which executive orders in particular Were they used? Absolutely. Were they abused? Nowhere near like they are now. One, because so many of these executive orders are taking the place of actual policy, right? Um, and I guess and we elected a reality TV star.
Yeah. Well,
So
that's a generous description.
yeah, reality TV
Person.
individual.
That's right.
And I think like the reason why I watch financial news in the morning. Here's where I'm going with this. CNBC. I love CNBC because I like the market. That was my day job in one of those GMC commercials years ago. So I watch all that, and I find that watching financial news is for me the best way to evaluate political news.
Yeah, probably.
Because the way that the policies interact with said companies, whether it's Tesla in a trade deal and it's China sales, or if it's Palantir or any AI company trying to figure out what they're going to do with startup or more money or whatever, you can kind of read between the lines because at the end of the day, the checks and balances are traders.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And I feel as if the broader world or the broader spectrum that that people we know run in that are interested in politics, they're just consuming cartoon-esque, memes, and there's just no substance.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because there's two thoughts that popped into my head. One, I read a book and it was 180 years of campaigns or something at one point, and I don't even know why I read it, but it just seemed interesting in the bookstore, and so I picked it up. And it went through, in the 1800s, what campaigning looked like. And although they didn't have these tools for mass media distribution, the population they had to deal with were much smaller. It was the colonies at one point and smaller states. There was as much lying and cheating and nefarious activity going on as there is today, right? It's just amplified and blown up. So it's not a new phenomenon, right? We tend to think of it because what we've experienced this feels very new because we grew up in an era where there was a lot of I'll say grace and sort of appreciation, respect for the
Ted Koppel
position. Yeah,
Ted Turner.
The way things worked were different, but historically that pendulum swings.
Yeah.
And the other thought was someone said to me when we were at T 1.0, they said, it's interesting. This is the same electorate that put Obama in office twice.
Exactly.
Right. Has elected this person, and so stuff changes. I think the blatant, for me, the blatant corruption going on isn't necessarily a new thing.
Yeah.
It's just the boldness of it is new, right? The obvious effort to do it and what's going on. I don't think these are new things. I don't think we would look back at 200 years and say, there wasn't nefarious dealings going on. It all boils down to economics. It all boils down to who's making money where. All policy. I mean, this is not a new phenomenon. The exposure to it and the boldness of it is stunning to us all.
You just became the brown bear in my next story that walked saw the trap, looked at the trap, put his fingertips on the trap, and walked into the trap, because my second topic was Speaker Mike Johnson yesterday, hot on mic, was asked the question about the emoluments clause and this whole Qatari 747 deal, bribe, whatever you want to call it. And he responded because he was leading into the whataboutism that everybody does now, and they were talking about the Biden crime family.
Yeah.
The quote, the reason many people refer to the Bidens as the Biden crime family is because they were doing all this stuff behind curtains in the back rooms. They were trying to conceal it, and they repeatedly lied about it. And he went on to say 2 seconds later, whatever President Trump is doing is out in the open. They're not trying to conceal anything, end quote. That is exactly what you were just saying.
I don't want to point the finger at the Bidens as the source of truth for that counterpoint. But in general, what he's saying, I don't disagree with it.
No.
I think he's saying it is front and center.
I completely agree with his whole statement. That's where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
Were the Bidens criminals? Whatever. If they were, find them. Yeah. Well, they had the opportunity previously to put them in front of judges, and they never did. Okay, so we're talking about speculation at this point. But what Mike Johnson said in regards to at least, quote, Trump is doing it out in the open. They are admitting that the optics of the corruption, the optics of the bribery, the optics of the just disdain for institutions and no oversight, because it's one thing. He went on to say something to the fact that we have institutions and courts and attorneys that it's their job to manage that process. Well, we did until your executive orders basically fired all the inspector generals and all the people
or said, even if you disagree with me, I'm not good luck enforcing it.
Exactly. So I guess my question to you is, what's off limits anymore? Do you believe that this administration has a red line, or do you think the American public is going to realize when they've crossed it without saying as much, and they'll just fix it at the midterms?
That I think that's the hope, right? That is that there's a counterforce as the pendulum swings, right, that begins to slow it and push it the other way. Ultimately, it will boil down to, because we have such a concentration of power and wealth, right? The people behind this administration are supporting it. I mean, he didn't put himself there on his own, right? So there has to be a recognition of there is a line somewhere we need to draw, and that boundary will get pushed back. My hope is that people look at this and say, maybe we should think about corruption differently, right? And whether you want to say, well, it's transparent, it wasn't before, but to acknowledge this is part of our system and maybe it should be addressed. There could be good that comes out of it, right? We could end up dealing with this in more successful ways.
What scares you the most? Let me just kind of run through a few scenarios of the current administration, and again, the whataboutism. They'll talk about Nancy Pelosi making $20 million on stock trades.
Oh, it's just noise.
Yeah, and yet he makes $4 billion on a crypto meme coin sold to North Koreans and Saudis. You have that, and then you have obviously the plane. You have what is the thing that jumps out to you like, are you serious? Are you really doing that? Or are you?
I don't think anything jumps out to me that way, because I sort of expect it with this. I mean, I don't. Yeah. There was no hidden. If I get into power, here's what I'm going to do. And when he says this is what I told people we're going to do, he did. I mean, I'm more shocked as I hear an interview with a dairy farmer in Wisconsin who's suddenly realizing the impact of the immigration policy is going to completely undermine their business, or a farmer in Nebraska who's doing the same thing. I mean, there's some real problems with the policies in terms of how they're going to trickle through the population. I think ultimately that creates the counterforce when you say, hey, you ruined a whole lot of people's lives. Maybe this isn't the best approach. Or they just keep accepting the news cycle feed in their social media from whatever magic media property was created that week, and
it's like says, that.
No, your life is good. Don't pay attention to it. I think that'll work for a period of time, and then I think it won't, and then the pendulum will swing the other way.
Well, I personally have my own theory, and it's kind of like a little bit of a Darwin theory, to be honest. Is like, do you quit fighting? Is kind of what I've been telling myself as far as like attempting to try and switch or fix a particular issue. And where I'm going with this is, look, if you want to implement shitty financial policy and you want to remove Medicaid and you want to kill SNAP and you want to defund IEP plans at public schools and you want to do all of these things that are simply cruel to humans that need help.
That's right. That's right.
You know what? A lot of those humans voted for him, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Let's let it all play itself out. Go ahead. This is where
I think that's what the election did. I mean, I honestly think that's what we're in. We're going to watch it play out for a while, and we'll see where the chips fall. And I don't think right now there is a force I see that is going to change that direction. In the next couple months.
Yeah.
Right? This has to play out further. And I think that's how people work. We have to experience enough pain before we really believe it's a problem. Because I hear it's affecting you, but as long as I'm told you.
Well, I'll give you a quick anecdotal.
That'll change.
I'll give you a quick anecdotal story, and then we're going to take a quick break and come back and talk about St. Louis. But I sent the AP News clip about Walmart has announced it's going to increase prices due to inflation, et cetera. This individual replied back to me, and their reply was, "Well, if they could fix all the crime in their stores, that would help bring prices down too."
Yeah, I mean that's a uninformed.
Oh,
it's a good talking point, but it's really for me a question of how much of that do you react to? How do you find the source of truth in all the noise? And I think that's the thing we all struggle with right now.
All right, we're going to come right back. We're going to talk about St. Louis as a brand. What is it? What does it need to sell? What does it need to ditch? And have a little bit of fun here in our backyard.
Sounds good.
All right. Okay, we're back. Now that we've determined that common sense is dead and empathy is on life support, that might be dead too.
I don't think it's dead. I think 80% of the people, as I said before, I talk with have a lot of common sense. There's a lot of good people I talk to every day. I just don't think it's translating into the sphere of media. I don't think there's a lot of common sense people are saying, I'm going to be an influencer and I really want to go change things.
Well, you talked about it. You referenced it. The numbers are 34, 33, and 33, which is 34% of eligible voters voted for Trump.
Yep.
33 Harris, and 33 were out. So 67 or 66% of people did not vote for him. So that's pretty close. It's a lot closer to 80% than it is.
Yeah. But you think about it, I mean, that those numbers aren't huge that have to move, right? 2% of people tip the election.
Yeah.
Right? If you have that middle block moves, I mean, it's incrementally small. When Obama first ran, I ran some numbers just being a little bit of a data wonk and polled. It was the first time public database voting records that you could go sort of look at on the internet. It was fascinating to me to realize there was only a couple swing states, and even in the swing states, there was a handful of counties. And so you begin to realize the national elections really boil down to certain communities and how they react. That's a nationally incredibly tight race.
Yeah. Well, the same thing happened this year. Even though the 7 quote swing states, they all went red. The reality is that it was an extremely low number of people. I think less than a million total,
right,
combined would have swung it. And actually, I think it's a much smaller number than that. Excuse me. I mentioned before the break I wanted to shift it up a little bit because obviously you've been in this town a long time. Excuse me. Long time. You've dipped your finger in the brand world, marketing world as well. And St. Louis is kind of it's just an anomaly to me. Having grew up here, moved away, lived in Chicago for a long period of time, came back, still pre-kids, and then had kids here. And, it's really hard to define it because I travel a lot for pleasure, for soccer, for work. And there's so many things that occur here, that exist here, I should say. From a vibe standpoint, from a culinary standpoint in particular, even an architectural, our architectural pile of goods is really, really high.
Yeah.
Our parks, everything else, and we just can't seem to pull it off to compete better consistently. We get wins. We say we score a conference here or there. We pick up the Frozen Four or whatever it might be. We can always point to wins. But on the whole, our population is declining. Our relevance is on the ropes.
Is the population declining as a region, or is it just the
Yes.
city is still struggling? I don't think the region actually saw a decline. I think we're below average in our growth.
We're stagnant.
Yeah, it's a fair way to describe it.
So if you
We're underperforming.
Well, I always look at our 5-hour peers is kind of how I'm not going to compare us to Charlotte. I'm not going to compare us to, the Southern California or Denver or whatever. If we can get there in 5 hours, those are the cities I care about because for the most part, those people are a lot like us, be it Chicago or Nashville, Memphis, KC, Indy. I'd go a little bit further. Minneapolis is one that's doing really, really well. They just seem to have different things going on for different reasons. Mm-hmm. So as an individual that's lived here for a long time, you've got a sweet spot in your heart for St. Louis. The question that I exited with, and I'm going to bring it up first, when you think about St. Louis as a brand, if you had to describe what that was, how would you do that?
Currently, what it is?
Yeah, to 2025.
God, confused. I don't know. I agree with you. I think we can't.
Sybil, St. Louis, Sybil's little sister.
We can't succeed despite ourselves. The challenge I think we've had for the last 10 years is we don't have the leadership we need at a regional level, right? And some of that is structural, and we kind of die, by a bunch of paper cuts. I was talking to someone the other day about this, and I said, they're bringing up the unification of the county and city, and someone was saying, well, it's not really that big of a deal, and someone saying, no, it is, and You can go back to compounded interest, right? You're a finance guy, and we're talking
Yeah.
about this. You think of the difference of a portfolio, and we talked about at one point mutual funds and ETFs, and the difference of like, well, that 1% fee you pay doesn't seem like much, but you carry that 1% fee for 20, 30 years, it's material. I look at St. Louis and say that our challenge is we have a bunch of these little 1% fees. We have too many municipalities, too much inefficiency, too much lack of leadership really charging things forward. That then blunts our ability to grow. And so we underperform. And you look at a 2 to 3% underperformance rate over time, you go 10, 20 years deep, that's a doubling of the value. That's our challenge, right? It isn't the one thing. It's
Right.
lots of little things we have to address. We don't come together as a community to address it well. And the other thing I think is interesting in other cities, we've had some really incredible champions step up. I mean, look at Detroit and other areas, and who've really led, right? A combined sort of image, real estate, ecosystem reinvestment at a scale I just don't think we've seen here. The Danforths have done some incredible things with plant life science, and that will serve us well and has, and hopefully will for many decades. It's an incredible effort they made. I think the Taylors right now are doing amazing things around the stadium and really think about their investment, and it's remarkable how many times they've stepped in to save, right, the ecosystem. But at a bigger level, right, we haven't had someone who's really come in and said, I'm going to take on with the resources and transform the region.
Right.
Until that happens, until we get behind a vision bigger than any of our individual stakeholder groups or ecosystems, I think we're going to struggle.
Well, the two cities that I always kind of hyper focus on, due to what you led off with, that being the city-county divide in particular, Indianapolis and Nashville, both over the past 10 years roughly, have gone the other way. They too had been divided municipalities, have since merged the two entities, and both of them are. I mean, look at what Nashville's done. Nashville's just off the charts, and both of those cities, in my opinion, Nashville more so than Indy. When you talk about plant life sciences, which is huge, great, big investments, it's awesome, really cool on a science magazine header, geospatial. Same thing, right? You people that are really excited about geospatial talk about geospatial. It's this massive global leading thing, but the average Joe that is a tourist is like, what?
Yeah.
You see where I'm going with this?
It's very intellectual. It's very advanced science.
Yeah.
Most of it uses science that half the population, it didn't exist as we grew up. So last time I had a biology class was ninth grade, and
right.
88 or something, right? The half the tools now that they use, those weren't innovations that even had occurred yet. So I get it. I think it's hard to connect with. And if back to your original question, if I were to pick a brand or wanted to pick one moniker,
yep.
I'm really big on construction. I mean, our company is focused there. I think we have one of the richest construction ecosystems in the country. We have 4 of the largest construction companies here, lots of mid-tier players. We build stuff all over the country and the world. The knowledge, both from a design standpoint, you mentioned architecture earlier, engineering, that all exists here, right, in a disproportionately large volume. And it connects to so many other industries, right, so many feeders. So I think this area of construction technology is emerging. If we wanted to come out, St. Louis is the center of, we build the future or something. I mean, I think there's a narrative there around our ability to build things and construct things.
Gateway to your data center.
Which ties back into data, right? All of that is enabled because
right.
we actually have to build things in that process, that we are the builders of the future. I think that's an interesting place that both plays to our roots as kind of the gateway to the West, but also, right, the constructor of the future.
So
that's cool.
So that's a macro play, and I completely agree, because understanding, look, in order to do that, you're talking big dollars, right? And that's good for your region. It's good for the economy. It's great for jobs. That's one of those foundational things that has to exist, but to a degree, it's below the dirt level, even though the products can be above. But if you're really thriving as a building city, you're outsourcing your skill sets. You're building in other cities.
Yeah, which we do.
Yeah, exactly, like Clayco.
Yeah, Clayco, Alberici, McCarthy, Arco.
Yeah.
These are multi-billion-dollar builders building all over the country.
So let me ask you this. From a brand perspective, what would you focus on to attract that 25 to 35-year-old? Because a building industry kind of approach That's good. That's going to get people with disposable income.
I think I think it's not one. Just as I said, the problems are numerous, so you're not going to solve it one thing.
Sure.
I think the populations you want to attract aren't just one population. So
Right.
I think construction robotics is a burgeoning field that's just beginning to take off, which is really interesting. So that intersection of both robotics and construction, we can do a lot there. Construction software and enablement around that piece is already starting to grow here. There's some interesting things happening. But you could begin to organize, I think, multiple categories that whether you're wanting to be, in the trenches or on the high rise and actually putting things together, or you want to be designing the tool sets, or you want to be designing the AI visualization tools and the laser scanners and the drones that now fly around and build digital models. I mean, how much digitization is occurring right now is really remarkable. Those are opportunities for people of all sorts of different skill sets to participate, to innovate, to create new companies, to create new research programs. And as I said before, because this is foundational to the growth of all the other economies, right? We can't have a healthy healthcare ecosystem if we don't have the ability to build labs and great hospitals, right? These dependencies on construction affect every industry. So I think this will continue to rise in importance at a national level as pulling workers in, attracting that workforce, because it's the enablement for everything else. So I think the opportunity right now, the window is St. Louis can begin to emerge as that nexus, that we really are the place where all this begins to organize and convene. And I think you could attract a lot of people to that because there's so many different ways people can plug in. I don't want to take anything away from Plant Life Science. I think it's done incredible things for the region. But as you said, it's not a game everyone can get on that field or feels invited to play on that field. I think construction has every piece of it. No matter where you are in your academic standings or where you were in your interests, you can find there's really interesting connection points. You want to be a drone operator and do cool things and create digital models. Lots of opportunity. You want to swing a hammer. You want to get up and you like actually welding stuff and putting some cool stuff together. Tons of opportunity.
So let me ask the question, regarding that little Venn circle that's right next to it, as far as like from a brand perspective, how do we attract? Let's talk about maybe the culture side of St. Louis outside of the industry portion. What do you think we should lean on? Because from a personal, cultural, societal, neighborhood viewpoint, anybody outside of St. Louis immediately is going to think, we've got weird cheese. We fry ravioli and it's dangerous, right?
We make the sweetest cake anyone's ever imagined.
Yeah. So
really butter cake.
So there's those types of things. What do you think something that maybe that isn't the typical headline that is really attractive for an individual that is interested in those industries? Like, okay, but I get it. That's a great.
Let it self-form. I mean, I give a lot of talks on culture creation within companies, and I think there's some parallels as we think about. This, like, what is the message, if you will, that goes out? I don't think it's one message. I don't know that model works anymore in decentralized media. I think it's lots of messages. And what we have to create is an enablement for that to happen organically. So that that robotics ecosystem is going to have a different message and they're going to attract different people than, the concrete guy who's doing interesting things than the steel person. So we talk about this in the work that we do often in cultures within companies. And we want to think these are top-down or monolithic motions, that we define it and everyone lives into it. I've given a talk multiple times where I have people, write on a piece of paper, your sales department, IT and some other group, and then use one or two words to describe the culture of that group. Then ask everyone who has the same words across all three categories, please stand up and explain it. No one's ever stood up.
Yeah.
Right. To recognize we are lots of different cultures, and that's okay. We're never going to be appropriately defined. And I think as we become more diverse by age, by interests, that becomes harder and harder to do, to say there's one moniker, one brand that identifies us.
Right.
I think what it is we need an ecosystem of brands and identities that appeal to different populations. I think we have to change our thinking and how we build culture.
Well, let me challenge you on go to the flip side of this, and you have a lifetime of experience of hearing everybody in town tell us how we're so good at X or Y, or this is the place.
I think we're better about telling us what we're not good at than we are.
Well, that's where I'm going with this as a brand. What is the one thing that maybe historically that we've kind of leaned into that you believe we should just drop? Don't do it anymore. What should we not be as a brand that has been historically associated with us?
I don't know. I have an answer to that. That's the one thing. I see us try a lot of things. I think we often compare ourselves or try to compare ourselves to other cities is the definition. Or who was it who was coining like we're the Silicon Prairie? We're playing games off of someone else's playbook. I think we have to figure out what is our narrative ourselves. Just own it and quit worrying about the rest of the world, buying into it.
Right.
I don't think that's our challenge. I think the challenge is it's a little more of building momentum and believing in ourselves and having success. The rest of that will solve, right? The communities will organize. They'll go to their people. They'll find them. They'll pull them in. I don't think it's we've underperformed. I don't think because of a branding exercise and identity. I think we've underperformed because the way we're performing, not the marketing wrapper we put around it.
Well, the whole show me state, right? The show me, it's really kind of
You can't fix the state and the city in one conversation.
No, but it's a trickle down effect, right? Because it's like, again, what are we showing? What are we really, as St. Louis? Let's talk about St. Louis for a second here. It feels as if we can't get out of our own way within our own county region, because there's a standoff between the two. And you do have the Taylors and the Danforths of the world, these families that have gone so far above and beyond to make amazing things happen from an industry standpoint, from an expansion, development, sports, et cetera.
Yeah.
It just feels like we don't really have a North Star. It's really where I'm going.
Well, this goes back to leadership. Right. I mean, so for me, where we started this conversation, one of the things that's missing is at a regional level, we don't have a leader, right? We don't have someone who's really painting a picture of the future and the potential and organizing a community around that. We have lots of efforts, lots of different things, but and maybe that will work out over time. Maybe that will play into this sort of micro community. But we as I said, we struggle from a lot of different cuts, right? I mean, I think you look at it. I'm an architect by training, so I think a lot of things are design and urban design. We're sitting here in Midtown. It's an interesting area, but then there's pockets of isolation before you get to the next interesting area.
Right.
It's not continuous. So we don't have a common sort of place yet. We haven't built up enough critical mass. But I think that's happening. That's beginning to happen. We're just this sort of slow, climb. I'm still pretty bullish on the tipping point is coming for this region.
How important was the mayoral election in your opinion to kind of lead into or play into what
as you know, I worked for Francis Lane his first term. Incredible respect. What an amazing mayor. I've really gotten out of politics and focused on my kids and family, so I didn't pay too much attention to it. I've been underwhelmed with the performance of the last couple mayors, and I'm cautiously optimistic. I mean, I don't know the current mayor. I've not met her. Don't know her senior staff.
Is it kind of a byproduct of an individual like a Bob Clark stepping up and taking such a prominent outward role in the campaign?
I think the last time we really had regional leadership coming together was when Francis Lay and Buzz Westfall, the mayor and the county executive, were genuine friends. Like they spent time together. I remember having lunch with them one time. Like they liked each other. That enabled them to work together differently and begin to sort of tackle problems differently. They weren't one leader, but they were sort of a duo. And unfortunately, Buzz passed away suddenly, and that kind of ended that magic of that team. I don't think we've had that since, and I think that's what's missing is we don't have someone stepping up. And it needs to be someone who either commands resources with a significant political office, but because of our fracturing, no one has enough of the resource, so it takes a team. That's tough to pull off. Or take someone coming out of government, in the private sector and nonprofit world who has enough resource they can really command the attention and build the organizational capacity. We just haven't seen that emerge either.
Yeah.
And that's in many of these other markets what set them apart. You've seen someone who really creates enough their critical mass. There's some great stuff happening in Midtown, and what Kransberg's doing here and building this arts district is amazing, and that will grow over time. But I would like to see it move faster. I'd like to see more development. I'm not being critical.
Well, but
because I don't have $100 million to say let's.
No, and everybody has to do it. Everybody has to do it within their own house too, because to your point, not only so within St. Louis, you have these different neighborhood districts that do require their own, wealthy donors to do their part, i.e., like the Kranzbergs here that, to your point, they've done an amazing job. You have the Taylors a little bit further down in downtown West. So you have this kind of fractionalism within the city itself, and then you have the fraction between the city and the county, and then you have an extended fraction between St. Louis County and St. Charles County, and then let's not even get into the difference between Moleg and Jeff City versus how they view the city of St. Louis.
All taxes we pay. That's the reason we underperform. You just listed them.
Exactly.
Right. It's all the 1% pain that adds up over time and compounds over time.
That compounded issue.
So, the question then I think is what do people begin to do about it, right? And how do we engage and how do we begin to change that system ultimately, right? We can recognize that's a problem and what do we begin to do? I think the future is really about collaboration, right? How do we begin to collaborate and leverage our collective resources together? How do we find opportunities? You said have a little empathy, have a little more understanding, and figure out a way to bridge, right, and work together. I think the companies that are going to succeed in the future in this AI economy where we're in constant change and evolution, no one's going to be able to solve on their own. It's going to take collaborative networks. And so I look at, all right, well, we maybe out of necessity have been forming collaborative networks. Maybe those can begin to grow. We have a rich plant life science ecosystem. We're building some cool stuff in geospatial. We're seeing, we have this construction density, which I don't think we've leaned into enough to make it into part of a strategy, but I think that's beginning to change. And then you look at the intersections between those. I think there's a lot we could all do to help enable that and kind of transcend the political geographic lines, right? We're not seeing the leadership to drive a regional agenda for many of those worlds. So,
I also just had an epiphany based on what you were just describing too, where you talk about the plant science or you talk about geospatial, et cetera, all these massive wins that we're experiencing. It's a marketing issue. It's a brand issue in so much that this shit is happening, but they're putting it within the industry publications, talking to people that are kind of like, to a degree, expect that news. And it's, it may or may not be exciting. It might be expected. It might be whatever, but it's within this silo, the ability. And I talked about how the Republican Party in particular, the digital consultants, they don't care about subject matter. They don't care about policy. They care about attention.
That's right.
And see where I'm going with this? Like, if we have all these great things that are occurring in construction density, in geospatial and all this other stuff, it's one thing to put it, in these super highbrow outlets to say, look
That's
how
right.
smart we are.
That's right. We'll go back to the original that Trump and the golden basketball video, right? We'll just tell people there isn't a crime problem. We'll just,
I don't know what you're talking about. Look at this park.
Yeah, there's no crime problem. And if you look at the facts and there's some truth, right? It is all distorted and it often works against us. But I agree. I don't, I'm not a marketing person. I don't know what the best way is to tell that story. I don't think we've ever told our story well, right? I think we still struggle with that. But I don't know. I'm still fascinated by this region, the potential. I look at for 3,000 years, this was the center of North America, right? There's more population, more people, more commerce living here.
Yeah. We
have an abundance of food and water and right all the things you need, which are becoming more and more important societally with water, the environmental damage and change. We've got a lot working for us. We just got to continue to figure it out and chip away. We'll get there.
Well, we got there. We got to the finish line. Chris Dornfeld. I appreciate you coming on, man.
That was great talking to you. This was fun.
Did you have fun?
Time flew.
We'll do it again.
Time flew. Yeah.
Next time we'll actually have more topics to
get organized. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the whole point of having a show with no guardrails.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. You can just grow up wherever you want. It's got to be great for the audience.
Yeah, well, it's you just make sure it's an MP3 format and click the explicit button, and you're good to go. You can say whatever you want to say. We're gonna boogie out of here. Thanks for your time. We'll definitely have you back.
Thank you. Great being here.
Maybe bring on a panelist as well because I want to get more into the AI thing because I think that's we're on the tip of the iceberg.
That's right.
And it's moving fast.
It's moving. I think it's not only moving fast; it's moving faster than I think people thought 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And the change it's bringing is profound.
Yeah.
It's which will create huge opportunities, right? But also be hugely disruptive.
I already know
that's a great topic.
I know who we're going to bring on. We're going to bring John Franco on with us. You know John?
I don't think I do.
Gorilla 76. You should. Yeah.
Great.
We'll make that connection. Tell me you're joking. It's that time. Chris Dornfeld and myself, we are out of here. Thanks for listening. Toss a little like on there. Review's great too. I like the bad ones too. Like I said, I'm all about the debate. Send it my way. Catch you next time.